Hi, I'm Ellen from The Chili Dog. Welcome to my studio and our second annual Knitting Summer School. I'm stepping away from my regular knitting tutorials for a few weeks so that I can speak more broadly about a variety of different knitting topics. This year for summer school, I invited my newsletter subscribers to submit their knitting questions and concerns. The responses I received primarily fell into three categories: projects, process, and fit and finish. Today's topic is fit and finish. Before I begin, I just want to give you a quick reminder that the best way to support the ongoing production of the knitting videos you watch and love here on our YouTube channel is by visiting the shop section of thechillydog.com and purchasing a pattern. While you're there, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter as well. Another great way to support our videos is by telling your knitting friends about the Chili Dog. If you love learning with us, so will they. Now, let's get started. I'm going to start things off today with 5 tips for creating better fitting garments. And I'm going to be speaking very generally about some best practices when it comes to knitting garments, not so much about the math that you would need to make adjustments to a pattern. Tip number 1, know your body measurements. Whether you're making a sweater or socks or hats or gloves, to make a garment that's going to fit your body, you need to know how big different parts of your body are. Tip number 2, determine your level of ease. And by ease, I don't necessarily mean the difficulty of the pattern you're following. Ease is a term that describes the relationship of the finished garment size to your body size. So, for example, the sweater that I made myself that I'm wearing today has a little bit of negative ease. The sweater itself is actually just a little bit smaller than my body, and it makes it cling very nicely. A few other examples of garments that have negative ease would be socks or gloves and hats. Because again, you want those things to cling to your body. You don't want them just all loose and floppy. However, there are some garments that need positive ease. Cardigan sweaters are the best example I can think of a garment that should have positive ease. You want the sweater to be a little bit larger than your body, because not only does it have to go over your body, but likely it's going to have to go over maybe a shirt that you're wearing over your body. So it's really important that the sweater is bigger than your body. Tip number 3, recognize that not all styles and shapes are appropriate for all bodies. And I mean this more as it relates to the proportions of your body as opposed to how small or large your body is. And I'm going to talk about this more in the next question. Tip number 4, if you want a garment that fits, you must swatch. You have to know your gauge to be able to make a garment that fits. And the only way you can do that is by swatching. I talked about this a lot in the process episode, and I'm just going to reiterate a few highlights today. Remember that your pattern gauge, the pattern dimensions as you're working, and the dimensions of the finished garment that are given in the pattern all are given for blocked, which just means washed and dried, fabric, not what's necessarily on your needles. Your fabric changes as soon as it hits the water and is dried. That's just the way it is. So it's really, really, really important to swatch so that you understand how it changes. Number 5, don't be afraid of math. It is impossible for a pattern to be written to accommodate every single shape that is out there. So there are often times you are going to need to make adjustments to a pattern, and that's perfectly fine. So the good news is that when you have to do the math to make adjustments, for the most part, the math we use as knitters is really the math we learned maybe in late elementary school and early junior high. So take a deep breath. You can do the math. Just relax and work through the process. Our first question today comes from Carol. How do I get a short row sock heel to fit right? Well, the cold hard truth, Carol, is that sometimes you may not be able to get a short row sock heel to fit right. Remember earlier I said that you need to recognize that not all styles and shaping methods are suitable for all bodies. Short row sock heels are a great example of just that. Short row heels fit people who have a very low instep well. And what I mean by that, just in case you're not familiar with sock knitting, if you have a low instep, it means that your circumference at the ball of your foot is about the same as the circumference of your foot right where your ankle starts to bend. If those two circumferences are about the same, a short row sock heel is going to fit you very good. If you have a high instep and the circumference at the ankle is a lot higher than the circumference across the ball of your foot, it's just not going to fit. There are a few options you could try if you are absolutely adamant that you have to have a short row heel. You could try working the heel over more than half of the sock stitches. That may not be great though if you have a lot of patterning across the instep of the sock. It may disrupt the stitch pattern, but I do know knitters who do that and it works very well for them. Another option would be to create some sort of gusset where you increase stitches before the sock heel and decrease after. And again, that's an option that could work. Personally, again, I would recognize that not all styles and shaping methods are appropriate for all bodies. And I would choose something different like a flap and gusset heel that fits people with higher insteps a little bit better. And let's compare the two socks here. They're both the same size, but you can see there's just naturally more fabric here up at the top of the instep of the flap and gusset heel as opposed to the short row sock heel. Our next question comes from Barbara. How do I adjust pattern shaping to fit me perfectly? Often the arms on older patterns are too baggy. Remember earlier I said that not all styles and shaping methods are appropriate for all bodies? Well, I think I'd like to amend that statement. I'd also like to add that not all styles are worth making adjustments to. When I read Barbara's question, the first thing that popped into my mind were those 80s and early 90s sweaters, back when we all had big hair, and the sweaters were very boxy and oversized and brightly colored, and a lot of them had very loose and baggy arms. That was just a style of the times. Personally, I would not take the time to try to adjust an older, outdated style like that if I was knitting a pattern. I think it would probably be easier to find a style that is more modern or a timeless style that fits today's lifestyle. Our last question comes from Rachel. How do I block a sweater? If you're like me, the first thing you think of when you hear the word blocking is laying blocking mats out across your floor, wetting your finished garment by spraying it or steaming it, vigorously stretching it into shape, and then pinning it into place as it dries. And that method may work very well for something like a lace shawl. However, that's not necessarily how you would block a sweater. When you're blocking a sweater, it just means that you're going to wet the fabric, usually by laundering it, and then drying the fabric. And sometimes drying it could mean laying it flat to dry, and sometimes you'll just pop it into the dryer. It depends on the fiber in the yarn that you're using. There are a few rules of thumb when it comes to blocking. First of all, block your swatches like you're going to block your finished garment. So that means you're going to have a chance to practice washing and drying your fabric long before you cast on your stitches of the actual sweater. If you don't know how to wash and dry your fabric, the best place to get the appropriate information is your yarn label. Your yarn label is going to tell you how to care for the yarn, how to wash and dry it. Usually the instructions are pretty conservative so that you don't damage or stress your yarn. Oftentimes, it's worth taking the time to stretch the boundaries a little bit and try blocking your swatches in different ways just to see what happens, so you understand how the fiber responds to different ways of being washed and dried or blocked. And finally, if you have knit a sweater like the one I'm wearing today that was worked from the top down and it's all one piece, as soon as you finish knitting, you could block your sweater or wash it and dry it, and you're ready to go. But if you have knit a sweater in pieces with a front and a back and sleeves that are all separate, oftentimes it's best to block those pieces before you join them together. It can make lining things up a little bit easier. In that case, you would wash the pieces as directed, and you would dry it as directed, but you may consider just damp drying it. Leave it just a little bit wet, and then using the blocking mats to pin the sweater pieces into shape. Again, that's just going to help make things line up a little bit easier as you're joining them together. So I hope you've enjoyed summer school. We've covered a lot of topics, from projects to process to fit and finish. Until we stitch again, happy knitting.